and most welcome to Heidegger 1645 of the series. And I will now make a little summary of what we went through in 1644, speaking of Johnston's Wittgenstein, Rethinking the Inner. And we've been discussing that Freud sort of copies and uses the technological scientific method as a metaphor. Uses that as an originator in the metaphor to bring it to the human mind, the human beings. And it's the lookout for an ulterior purpose, something that is causative of all things that happens in a human being's life. Freud calls this the subconscious, and it becomes the first cause of one's doings, one's experiences, one's intentions. So that is in itself an assumption made here, and Johnston Wittgenstein refers to this as the confounding of two entirely different language games. One is the language game of perception, emotions, feelings, experiences, understandings, and so forth. And the other, quite differently, is how we express them to others. Those things have a particular purpose. It can be comparable to say, if I am angry, or if I tell somebody that I'm angry because of maybe a particular person or something that happened, that proves to be highly different, not having the same extension whatsoever. So they play by different rules, and that means they can simultaneously both be true, although they are different. And that is, this is how extreme it is actually. They will not even be possible to share truth value. They are unrelated, not of the same stem or starting point. This is very close to what was pointed out earlier on. And I especially like what I found on page 108. And that is that meanings are not pre-arranged. What we say can mean something well beyond what we, so to say, innerly intended, or if you want to put the subconscious here, the subconscious cannot be in control of intention. And in the example on page 108, it's the victory gesture. And although we are certain that it means celebrating peace or being for the peace, we don't know its exact consequences before it's put in a certain context in its environment where it happens. And intention must, of course, be part of how it's executed, if we're going to use the word intention. You can't have intention if you constantly, so to speak, misfire. That is not the working of intention. Intention means, in the grammar of intention, wanting to mean something and then pretty well execute that as well. The subconscious is not playing by those rules at all. And Johnston is pointing out that more or less, maybe this is more of Wittgenstein, but more or less Freud doesn't examine the subject more than superficially. So he more or less postulates the existence of a subconscious. And as I see it, it's pretty obvious that he's using the scientific model as the starting point of this metaphor, as the subconscious as causative of the thing, without even further examining if there is some truth to this. Does it work? Is it viable in the long run to do this way? So very little of groundwork is, so to speak, put down by Freud. I'm going to be quite mean, and maybe now I'm going further than even Wittgenstein and Johnston. You could say that Freud went into a road already paved and said, I made this new magnificent discovery, when he in actuality used pre-established scientific structures and transposed them to the human being, the human mind, if you prefer. could be compared to meaning too, and I think I passed through this area 2 lectures ago. I think it was in 1642 or 3. Meaning is also used as too quick model for the workings of concepts, expressions, words, gesture. And you just say the meaning of it was. And just as is in the case with the intention, we do not look at the failure to produce the correct word for an apt situation. But we just say there is meaning, and possibly we can add to this that extra rule of failure to produce the correct meaning, which is something we say in daily speech without going so far as claiming an inner. I didn't mean to say that, or that sort of came out the wrong way. Meaning is a clumsy, over-generalized way of looking at things that not at all do justice to the complications. Just imagine a situation. How complex isn't a situation? And how on earth could you reduce that to just say, the word has a meaning, and it's this invisible fellow, accompaniment, being everywhere and nowhere at the same time, always adjacent to the actual word. On the contrary, both Johnston and Wittgenstein are arguing for that words have incredible delicacy to them, that they are something you weigh in your hands, that you are extremely careful with. And you use that exact word in that exact circumstance at that specific time for success. Compare that fine-tuning and deliberation and carefulness to the clumsy meaning. It is almost like saying, I don't care how I spread my words. I just say I meant this or that or something similar to this. That is ignoring all of the beauty of language. I would say that is the construction of a ready-made universal grammar of Noam Chomsky, or why not a constructed language that never ever have been used and never to be used either. Instead, carefulness, distinction, skill. Want. Years of training. The ability to deliver right in time. All these adds loads more distinction, accuracy, sharpness. In the musicality of language, you get a whole other view of what language is. Much deeper, attuned. Reading on page 109. The mystery of music is that we find it not just enjoyable, but meaningful. Somehow an array of sounds can seem to express our deepest feelings about life and the world we live in, and a brief musical phrase can capture the very essence of a feeling or experience. Isn't that an absolute difference to the clumsy parting of everything into word and meaning? In linguistics, that was often referred to intention and extension. Reading Johnston's book about Wittgenstein, I now come to the understanding that there is loads and loads more to this. And this is far from as simple as what you find in common parlance. This can also be compared to the understanding of something that has been criticized by the scientist Smoling and philosopher Roberto Unger, and that is what they call the cosmological fallacy. The innerness always has an invisible friend, its companion, its other side, on the outer. So at the same time as an inner is postulated or assumed or misunderstood, if you like, there will immediately erupt an outer. The inner and outer comes hand in hand, and it becomes very clear in the cosmological fallacy. And that's the idea that understanding is outside of everything, and it's understanding with an essence. So we can actually look at the universe from the outside, see its development as if we were not part of it, or that our thinking was outside of it in some ways. And this is a fallacy that has dominated science for decades, if not centuries. One example that recently has been proved wrong is the use of real numbers to do all the calculations of this universe seen from the outside. And we now come to the realization that there is no room for the real numbers in the universe. They do not fit what even a black hole can sort of set harbor one real number, because it's just infinite. It's too big. We call the inner and outer reverence. And this is also a view that has been brought under the light of Thomas Nagel. He calls it a point of view from nowhere. It doesn't sound so dramatic to assume a point from nowhere, but it has. It comes out of misunderstanding everything about language, not going into how you actually use your own language. So it's not only disastrous for the understanding of the universe, it is also very damaging to your own workings, In no way can any understanding be outside of the universe. It is constantly situated in the language game where it was, so to say, constructed to be or came about. It's probably a more fitting word. Outside of that, it fails to have a purpose. It cannot do anything. It becomes, if you like, a completely blunt instrument, impotent to do what you want to do with it. So it's more than parasitic on understanding. It shows that your understanding is badly hurt. There is no sudden awakening from this. This is more the traditional philosophical approach that by showing some simple arguments and propositions, putting the points down, so to speak, using logic, reasoning in short spells. No, it's not enough to have a working effect. Elongated training under the incredible insights of Wittgenstein is a necessity. No one knows how much time he spent on these things, but as I see it, he's the biggest genius in philosophy during the 20th century, somewhat comparable to Derrida and Heidegger. And he also had the somewhat dubious privilege to be absolutely confounded or himself tricked into to misunderstand everything. When he started out, when he had gone to Cambridge, he met up with Bertrand Russell and started his examination of the world, which later ended in his magnum opus Tractatus. He was well into the confusion, not even knowing that there was a misunderstanding somewhere underneath. And it's almost, this is my imaginary understanding of it, but it's almost like he strived the decades after Tractatus to understand what was wrong with it, or what was wrong with his own foundational grip of the world, trying to see be able to go back, which is hard in itself once you started on the path of misunderstanding. It's I would say it's almost comparable to a boat, especially in the olden days, where you didn't have GPS or a communication system, but that you were maybe entirely dependent to know where you departed from, and after that you have to sort of check the deviations and adding the legs that you passed and so forth to know where you are. But if you were to not know your departure place, you would be absolutely lost. I mean, that could actually be more the case with a submarine who doesn't have access to the sun and the stars. Submarine imagined before communicative systems, and they somehow lose their point of origin. I think what Wittgenstein did was finding back to port, to start anew somehow. And this is in itself absolutely amazing, how that could be made. Many other things that he goes into are things that for most philosophers and even us common normal people are not things that we should put any interest into whatsoever. We see we see them as too trivial to ask. If I have a perception, does it stem from somewhere, as I always assumed, or does it not? And therefore, we will be governed or ruled by these almost unthought assumptions, and we would never be able to discover them. Before we even start to do our own thinking, they're already firmly established. So we'll be using them to get further. Somehow he managed, and to keep his delicacy and feel for the whole thing, his general feel for the whole thing. Some of these points are just, for instance, that some of the things that, well, in the beginning we call them that they happen in the inner, but some of these things have duration, for instance, like an emotion, it comes and it passes, it has intensity, can be of different strengths, and it colors other things. That is in itself pretty amazing, to have the fine-tunement, to have the feel for these things. Because I think we become blunt in the misuse of language. We can no longer discern that there is a difference of perceiving and talking about perception. And then, of course, the arguments will be so much more lightweight, so much less convincing. It would be very hard for them to go through, to convince you when you read it. And that's why many of the later works of Wittgenstein's remarks on the philosophy of psychology, the Brown Book, philosophical investigations, Z, etc., are all not strong convincers, not strong in argument. It would be very easy to read one of them, Summers' night and forget about it the day after and just say, what an interesting read. Since there are no strong arguments, you will not get a new strong conviction. And Wittgenstein is not looking for a strong conviction in the reader, trying to convince him or her. Instead, it's more of an open presentation to try these things out honestly, and I would say playfully. See if it makes sense that the different language games are created and have, so to say, different backgrounds and context for their becoming, and therefore it's not sensible to assume that they belong to the same category. These things needs to be tried out, to be felt out like you try out a suit to see if it fits, if it does its job. And this is, of course, a whole other approach than the one that we usually encounter when we read philosophers, and especially the modern philosophers are very strong in argument. Short, foundational things that often possibly works too much with contradictions and counter-arguments. It becomes a short time of happy conviction, and then you will be convinced somewhere else for a new thing. This is rather looking for something much more enduring and lasting. Something that goes to the blood or the body, the mass of the whole thing. Not being limited only to short convictions, change of attitude. This can be compared to how Bertrand Russell, during his lifetime, I think he changed philosophy a dozen times. Every time it was a new strong argument and he changed his direction. This is definitely longer lasting than a couple of years. This is profound, and it addresses something much more weighty, your own use. This is why arguments don't serve the same purpose in Wittgenstein as in others. The encouragement is go to your own use. See how you are already using expressions about emotions. How could the language about dispositions, as it's called at some place in the book, be used, and for whom are they presented? Are they from the first person perspective or a third person's perspective? That makes a whole difference. There is a nice outtake here on page 148. The second paragraph. So far we have contrasted sensations and feelings with emotions, but many concepts of the inner fall into none of these categories. One group among these is what might be called aspects of the intellect. Concepts such as understanding and remembering, thinking, intending, or knowing, and believing. So you see there is a whole lot of them. What is knowing? And I think knowing shares some similarities with what Wittgenstein, Johnston discussed here about memory. Knowing something doesn't have a written counterpart inside the head somewhere. It's not stored at a certain location to be read off in the future by the most advanced AI that ever came about. I think that was also affected our way of trying to understand. That understanding itself has become trying to imitate that way of understanding, knowing. Inscribe it in your head so that there is a reflection in your head of what you want to learn. It's okay as training, but if you think of it as how think it is also how it works, it will set you into the wrong way directly. If you start thinking that you are a computer, also in a computer that holds true. It's actually a very good comparison. Computer, there are engravings that's readable. And if the computer stops to work, you will still be able to read the memory lines stored on the disk. And we have made the assumption that we are working the same way as a machine that was devised for a certain purpose, that had already in its nascent time a purpose by the constructor, by the factory, what it's going to do. And those are features that no human being share. well, might even, there is no living organism on this planet that has those properties. So it's revealing how, well, it's also interesting that that explanation fits our misunderstanding like a hand in a glove. And of course, when it came, computers came, we were already on that path. So this parallel development is utterly convincing that computers were already understood to come into existence in the early 20th century. Sometime calculating machines would come about, and then they came. But it's the same technological thinking, happens to be the same, or almost the same. I am not going to go into the details here, but I think it suffices to say that they are incredibly parallel. And how utterly convincing wouldn't it be that we already predicted the coming of the computers, and by thinking, by philosophizing, by maybe even looking at human beings. So that is incredibly compelling, hard to resist, and who can resist it? They happen to grow in the same environment. That doesn't mean that they are same. And the sameness is what tricks us to some part. We already trodden that path for centuries before, so why not continue to go into that way of thinking? And of course it was well established that everything has a cause in that technological sense. So it's really a tough challenge for Wittgenstein to be able to still all these, although how utterly convincing all these things are, to be able to get in and at least sow a little seed of doubt into all this. To say that, well, let me give some example. Others tried, well, not tried intentionally, but Kurt Gödel did try out this idea that you can find the origin, so to speak, the innerness of mathematics within mathematics. He did end up proving the opposite, that there is no inner purpose or inner origin of mathematics like that, an intention, ulterior intention. That is not as convincing. It's not convincingly enough because it doesn't teach you where is the misunderstanding. It only shows that something is a paradox, something's wrong. And we cannot go from that to an understanding of how it works. And therefore, it has not been able to work that way. It doesn't point out the confusion. Paradoxes we had for millennia, and it takes a no, we need something more, and we need something that really points out the actual misunderstanding. Otherwise, we'd be stranded with the homunculus of perception, looking at an inside screen somewhere in the darkness of the skull, where a projector is situated and the homunculus is viewing the outside world as relayed by the eyes, well, rest of the world as well, ears, nose, tactile sense, and you sitting inside, isolated there, looking at that. It's only that a homunculus would need a homunculus within her to see what it's seeing. An infinite regress, a paradox. But definitely not enough to steer us on understanding the sea. How does this start? Because that is much more demanding, and it takes trying things out and see how they work. Do they? Could this actually be something that could be working? It's trying it out, because language is doing. Then realizing that there are confusions is a sort of doing. Needs to be trained, needs to be practiced, refined for its embetterment, to make it as resilient and powerful as possible, because there is a lot of opposition in yourself against this. It's not an easy thing to understand to its full, because it brings in all aspects of your reality. I would say there are very few people who would be willing to, without this rather complex and worksome job practice, would be able or willing to give up the misconception of the inner. Or it's not only about giving it up, you need to understand how it works, and that's more correct answer. Without understanding, it's working. How does it come about, and why is it the case so often repeated? And the differences are important, then you become clearer that the inner is not just a black blob, a black hole inside of you. Second paragraph on 151. What about emotions, though? What would we make of someone who said, "Now I know what it is like to fear"? This seems to make better sense than someone saying she knows what it is like to remember, and yet it is not like the sensation case, for there is no particular experience the individual can point to which constitutes her fear, while neither can she point out a particular circumstance where she can point out what is knowing. But you will still know what knowing is. There will be no doubt whatsoever in you what knowing is. And you cannot connect it to a certain time, a certain experience either. All you can do is say, I know what it is. And this saying, I know what it is, it's not the same as the actual knowing. Very important. Two different language games. Well, I terminate there. I say thank you very much for your patience and have a very pleasant afternoon, or whatever the time is where you are. Bye bye, and thank you for 1645.